Welcome to my vegetable plot on a beautiful July day. It's the 9th of July today, so quite near the beginning of the month, and there's so much going on in the vegetable plot that today I'm going to take you on a tour around my vegetable plot and to show you all the things that have happened since the last tour, which was only 4 or 5 weeks ago. But what you are going to see in certain areas of my vegetable plot, a massive difference from even 4 to 5 weeks ago. And it just demonstrates how fast the vegetable growing season can go, particularly when you get to a month like July and into August, where the temperature is really warm. And of course the impact on that is faster growing vegetables, but also faster growing weeds, and we have to control those as well. So join me as I show you some wonderful things that are happening on my vegetable plot during the month of July. So I'm going to start off in what I would say is my most untidy part of my vegetable plot. You can already see some weeds in the soil right in front of you, and that's an inevitable consequence of vegetable growing, particularly at this time of year. So even though it's good for the vegetables and the fruit, and they will grow very, very quickly at this time of year, it's also good for the weeds because they will grow just as fast and you need to keep on top of them. So weeding is a job I'm constantly doing on this vegetable plot, and this bed here is something I'll try and get round to later today or maybe tomorrow. Right in front of the camera I have some herbs. Lemon balm is the light green bush on the left hand side, and then rosemary, which is a hardy perennial. Rosemary is a fantastic herb to grow because once you've planted it you pretty much don't have to do anything with it. I bought this particular rosemary plant about, I'd say, 8 years ago, and every single year it produces me a huge amount of rosemary, and it's one of my favourite herbs, fantastic for all sorts of different recipes. Behind there I've got some sage, which also appears to be quite healthy, and just in front of here I have some chives which are just starting to flower. This is an area I'm planning to do a bit of work on over the next couple of months, adding a bit of organic matter and just making the soil a little bit more rich. If you come around here, right next to the herbs, we have the climbing French beans. If you saw my video a few months ago where I showed you how to plant seeds outside, these are the seeds I was planting. And in that video I explained that I did plant some earlier French bean seeds in cell trays and they did germinate. I planted them out, but within a few days I forgot to net them and the birds had eaten them, so I replanted some more. And as you can see, you can probably see on the camera, these are netted. They're completely covered in bird netting right the way to the top of the metal support, and they're growing really nicely now. You can see they're starting to find themselves up the metal supports. So maybe in a week or two's time, when they're a little bit higher and larger and more established, I'll take the netting off so that the beans can then grow right the way to the top, and I'll get a load of climbing French beans from this crop. If we move just behind them, very interestingly, are a few sunflowers. Now you can see the French bean support just behind these sunflowers over here. These are giant sunflowers and there's 4 of them. And you can see one of them already is starting to produce an absolutely beautiful sunflower. Sunflowers are great for the vegetable garden because they attract a lot of pollinators. Bees particularly like sunflowers. And that brings them into the vegetable plot and they will pollinate other vegetables. There's another flower head on this one which is about to flower. And then if you look at the previous tour, you'll notice that there's a couple that really struggled, but somehow they've started to get growth on them. And these had been attacked heavily by slugs, and I wasn't sure whether they were going to survive or not. There's that one there and this one over here. Now this one, last time I filmed, was pretty much down to a stalk, and I really had thought I'd lost it. But as you can see, there's more growth. I just kept watering them. I have found sunflowers over the years to be pretty hardy, and even though you think you might have lost them, they do come back. So it's always worth, if you've got sunflowers that have been attacked, it's always worth keeping them in and watering them just to see if this happens. Just behind the sunflowers we have some Calvert and Wonder peas, different sowing there. The taller ones were planted a number of months ago and they've nearly been completely harvested, so they'll be dying off and going yellow as they do. But the ones at the lower level were planted about 6 weeks later than the original sowing, and they now are starting to find the way up the support and now give you another supply of wonderful peas. And if you move just from the left of the peas and we come around a little bit here, we'll see 2 brassica cages here. In the first one I have Swedes, which are doing remarkably well after a very, very slow start, and in the larger one at the back near the Polyhouse, that's where I've got a variety of cabbages, kale and Brussels sprouts. So let's have a look at the Swedes first. Now when I first planted these out, I was a little bit concerned by the rate that they were growing, and the ones nearest the far side of where the slabs are standing up were getting attacked by slugs. But I left them in, kept watering them, and as you can see they've grown amazingly well. I've just removed a bit of netting at the front here, just so that you can see how well they're actually growing. I don't know if you can see the swede at the base of that plant, just in there, already a really good size. So these are going to be fantastic. You can see how healthy the leaves and the foliage are and how high they are. So I think I'm going to get some really good swedes again this year. Last year they were brilliant and I had them all through the winter, right up into the start of the spring this year, and I think I'm going to get the same again. So if you haven't tried Helena before, definitely try growing these swedes, because so far, over the last couple of years, they've never let me down. So if we go and look in the Brassica cage, which is next to the swedes, you'll see a huge amount of growth in here as well. And there's different varieties of cabbage here. You can see the round white cabbage, which is a variety called cabbage. A little bit of attack on the top there, but they're not too bad at all. And then we've got these cabbages here, which I can't remember the name of them, but they're growing fabulously well. And for some reason, they're not attacked at all. It appears that the slugs don't like these types of cabbage. And right next to them we have these cabbage here, which the variety escapes me, and I'll put the name on the screen, but growing remarkably well with no sign of any attack whatsoever. I'm going to harvest one of those today. They look absolutely brilliant. Next to the cabbage I have around about half a dozen Brussels sprouts, and these are a variety called Brendan F1. They're looking really healthy as well. And right at the far end of the Brassica cage, next to the Brussels sprouts, is my kale. This is a variety called Dwarf Green Curled, and I've been harvesting that now for a few weeks. Took some home for last Sunday's dinner, and it really is lovely, lovely variety. What I've tended to do with kale over the last few years, rather than dig a whole plant up, is just take off the bottom leaves, and I find that to be much more productive and gives me a longer harvest of kale. So there's about half a dozen plants tucked right at the end of the cage there. And here we have some mint. I mean, the smell of this mint is absolutely amazing. And that should be good to harvest for the rest of the month. After that, it starts to flower and will start to die back a little bit. Now in my tours, I've always been conscious to show you exactly what's going on the plot, good and bad. And as you can see now, I'm on the other side of the Brassica cage from where we were looking at just a few moments ago. But some of the cabbage in this corner here have been heavily attacked by slugs. I don't think it's butterflies, because I can't see any butterflies inside the netting, and also I've been trying to keep the netting as secure as possible, so I'm pretty sure it's slugs. And I think because they're being attacked at this end over here, it's likely it's because it's located near this edge over here, which is next door's plot, which has got some high grass in it, and these are all good hiding places for slugs. So it's probably the fact that these cabbages here are being attacked just by the location of where they are. As you can see, even though this is a neighbour's plot, I have tried to keep this tidy and neat as much as I can, just to try and reduce the possibility of that happening. So we'll move from the Brassica cages over to the bed to the left hand side of that, and this is this one here, and this has changed a lot since the last tour. Now if you look at the tour for last month, you'll notice that this bed had onions and garlic in it, and as you can see now, it's been dug and planted with other vegetables. These are a few spare beetroots that I planted between the shallots that have now been harvested, and these are a variety called Minetta. If I can show you, the beetroot is already bulbing up really well. Should mean that I'm going to get some decent beetroot. You will see in a few moments time that I have got other beetroot planted, but this is going to be the first lot to harvest. Now beyond that, I've created another netting structure, very simply out of canes and bottles, and if you want to see how to make a simple structure like this, then I'll put a link to the video that I made a couple of months ago, which shows you all the quick and easy steps of how to make this netting cage at minimal expense. Now under the netting about 2 weeks ago, I sowed two varieties of French beans. These are the dwarf French beans, or sometimes referred to as field beans. The ones nearest to the camera are a variety called Ferrari, and you can see they've literally just started to germinate, which is fantastic. You can see them just appearing where they were planted in many positions. And on the far side, the variety is called Tender Crop, and these have also started to germinate, as you can see. Everything today will have a really good watering before I go, and that'll really bring these on. Now here's something you might find interesting. Just beyond those French beans which we just looked at, I've got 8 pepper plants. These are a variety called Gusto F1. And I think in this country, in the UK, a lot of people are very nervous about planting peppers outside. I have got a couple in the Polyhouse as well, and Polyhouse is clearly a good environment for growing peppers because it's warm, and the temperatures in there will be out on average a lot warmer than they are outside, even on the hottest days. But there's absolutely no reason why, when you get to July in the UK, that you can't plant pepper plants outside. These were planted outside about 2 to 3 weeks ago, And as you can see, they're looking pretty healthy and they've got lots of flowers on them. And one advantage of having them outside as well is that they'd be a lot easier to pollinate. Clearly, if you've got them indoors in a greenhouse or a polytunnel, then it's going to require the pollinators to get inside there. But outside, they're open to everything. So that's an advantage. So we'll come back in a couple of tours' time and have a look at how well these have actually done. Now, next to the peppers, at the beginning of the next bed along, we've got outdoor tomatoes. These are a variety called Momande. And again, I think a lot of people have got the impression that you can only grow tomatoes indoors, but there are plenty of varieties that are perfectly suitable for outdoor growing, and this is one of them. These were a little bit slow to start and took a little bit of time to adjust to the outside conditions when I planted them outside about 4 weeks ago now. But as you can see, the foliage on them looks really, really healthy. And we're also starting to see some tomatoes. But these are looking absolutely fabulous. I have fed these a couple of times with tomato feed once they started producing the flowers, just to give them a bit of a boost, and that gives them the nutrients they need to flourish. So I'm pretty hopeful that these tomatoes are going to give me a really good crop this year. When we go inside the polyhouse, I have got some other tomatoes in there that I started in a grow bag, and again from the previous tour you'll notice that they were doing very, very badly, and I've transplanted them. This is one of those that I planted outside. And if you look at the condition of this when I transplanted it, which was pretty much dead, it's now starting to show some really healthy growth on it. So I think I've rescued that plant. And the way I've done that is to apply 2 doses of diluted hydrogen peroxide. I am going to be doing a video in the near future once these plants have got a little bit bigger, talking about hydrogen peroxide, how to use it, and it's really an experiment to see if it works. But as you can see there, the indication is that they're pretty good. Just next to this tomato plant, I've got some onions. Now these were planted from seed, and these are now starting to bulb up. The ones nearest to the camera are Buckinghamshire Champion, and the ones on the far side are a variety called Kelsey. They're looking okay, and as you can see, they're now starting to bulb up. I did give this a good weeding about a week ago, and now they just need a good water, which you'll get later today. Now next to the onions were the broad beans, and I dug those up and I harvested the last of those last week, prepared the ground, and I've planted something else in there which I'll talk about in a minute. But I can't move on without discussing the broad beans. The amount of broad beans I got was absolutely tremendous, the most I've ever had for the area that I've grown. They're a variety called Valenciana. They're an overwintering variety that I planted the end of October, beginning of November. As you can see from the pictures, I've harvested so many broad beans. I'm definitely going to grow that variety next year. And after I'd taken them out, I prepared the ground, added a bit of fish blood and bone, and then I've planted a line of turnips and another line of beetroot directly into the ground. I'm giving them some protection, particularly at this time of year, because as the tender shoots were to germinate, it's likely that either slugs will get them or the birds would have them. So I'll give them some protection. Once they germinate, I'll then thin them out, and with the turnips, they will be then netted over to prevent the birds getting at them. So moving on to the next bed, and this is a bit of a strange one. I've got a combination of mainly squash plants on the left hand side. In fact, actually, the first plant is squash, then there's a courgette or zucchini, and then there's a couple more squash plants. And next to them, all of these are courgette zucchini plants. But the reason I'm finding it a little bit strange this year is that they're growing really slowly. And my experience, particularly of zucchinis, when they get to this size here, they normally accelerate quite quickly. They are starting to make a little bit of progress, and there is courgette zucchinis on there. You can see them starting to grow, but they're not growing as fast as I've experienced in previous years, and I've got no idea why that is. I have given them plenty of water, but they just seem to be a bit slower this year. I wonder if that's happening to anybody else. I mean, if you're finding either your zucchini courgettes are slower than they normally are, or maybe any other plants, just pop a comment below and let me know, because it'd be interesting to see if other people are experiencing that type of issue. So just beyond the courgettes, we have the sweet corn. There's about 8 plants there, and they're different sizes because they're different sowings. And for some reason, this is another thing this year, for the first time, I struggled to germinate. I've always done exceptionally well with sweet corn. If you look at videos of tours from previous years, you'll see a whole load of sweet corn plants. I've got no idea why. Maybe it's just a batch of bad seeds, but I've managed to get 8 plants out. So at least that's going to give me a little bit of sweet corn for this year. And just next to the sweet corn, I have my leeks. These are a variety called Autumn Mammoth. These were planted out, I'd say, around about 4 weeks ago. And they're doing okay. You can see the drill holes that are in there. So when you plant these leeks outside, you use a dibber to create a nice hole and you put the leek inside the hole, but you don't backfill it, because when you water, as you can see, it starts to naturally backfill. That means that the soil around the leek is slightly looser, and the theory is it will give you bigger leeks because there's less resistance when it's growing. That's the theory anyway, and that's the preferred way of planting leeks. Next to that, there's a whole bay of beetroots, and these are slightly behind the ones I showed you earlier, but they're starting to bulb up as well. Two varieties here, one called Minetta, which is like the ones we looked at earlier, and the other one is called Pablo F1. And there's another sowing of spring onions just next to them, and they're growing okay. I grow these in clumps. This is something I saw on Charles Dowding's channel. Rather than try and plant individually, grow them in 4s and 5s, and then when you need some, you can just pull up a whole clump rather than individual ones, and that seems to work really well. Now, just next to the spring onions are my cucumbers. Now, you can grow these in different ways. I've always supported them up canes to keep the cucumbers off the ground. So as they grow, you just tie them up gently, but don't tie them too tight. You want to leave a little bit of a gap between the stem of the cucumber plant and the cane. So basically, don't make the tie too tight, because as the plant grows bigger and the stem starts to get thicker, it could end up strangling itself. So if you are going to do this, you have to be careful. This is a variety called Marketmore 76. Fantastic variety, one that I've always grown. And I know just looking at these, I'm going to get a massive amount of cucumbers already. You can already see cucumbers being formed on the plant. And as the flowers start to develop, that's when the cucumbers will grow. So I did have 10 plants, but one of them didn't grow. And so I put a climbing French bean plant in its place, and that's nearly grown to the top of the canes. Now, cucumbers demand a lot of water, so these will be watered every single day. You might notice on the camera that some of the leaves are more yellow than others, and that happens every single year. But again, I just try and make sure I water. When you water at the base of the plant. Another tip for watering is that you want to make sure that the water gets to the roots as quickly as possible. So as you start to water your plants, you'll notice that the ground around it will slightly compact every time you water. That's just the pressure of the water compacting the soil. So before I water today, I'm going to hoe gently around each plant and loosen the soil around the base, and then apply the water. And that way the water will go directly into the ground. Or if the ground is too compacted, you'll often find it could run off, particularly if you're on a sloping site. So that's my plan today for the cucumbers, but I'm really pleased with them. And again, because I've grown these every year, I just know that I'm going to get a fantastic harvest of these. Now, just behind the cucumbers, there's a small area of lettuce. I grow an awful lot of lettuce on my plot, and these ones have now got to the stage where, because they haven't been harvested quick enough, they're starting to bolt, and their natural instinct is then to go to seed. You can still harvest and use this lettuce, and I will. You can see the stems starting to grow very long, and they will start to produce flowers on top, which is where the seeds will come from. So I'm going to harvest as much of this as I can today and give away whatever I can, use whatever we need, and the rest will go in the compost bin. But you're going to see in a minute when we go in the Polyhouse, there's also lettuce in there. The tall ones are called all the year round. I've also grown Little Gem, there's a variety called Lakeland, and the last few Lola Rossa are ready to be harvested. If you've never tried Lola Rossa, definitely grow Lola Rossa. It does a number of things. Firstly, its flavour is a little tiny bit more bitter than standard lettuce, so it gives a really nice sharp flavour in your salads and whatever else you use it for. And secondly, it just provides a nice colour contrast in the vegetable plot. Everything's green and that's wonderful, but as you can see, the nice splash of purple just makes it a little bit prettier. So if we move on to the two beds just behind where the lettuce and the beetroot and the cucumbers are, and then we come to the strawberries, and these finished fruiting about 2 weeks ago. And I think I mentioned on the May tour how many strawberries I've actually had. Now, even though strawberries have finished fruiting, you might think, now I'll just leave them till next year. Well, that's not a great idea, because if you want to produce plants for next year, you still need to make sure you water these plants. Otherwise, the production of the runners is going to be significantly hampered, and you might not get the plants you want. So what I'll do with this area when I get a little bit of time is do a bit of weeding. Lots of weeds in this bed here. Awful lot of weeds actually. So they need to be taken out, and I'll give this a really good water, and that'll then start to give the plants the energy and the nutrients they need through the water and whatever's in the soil to produce the runners and the plants for next year. And something else I've done well with, and I always do well with, as you can see, is rhubarb. I've already picked one lot of rhubarb But as you can see, the growth of this rhubarb is absolutely fabulous. I think it's because of the position it's in. It's in a really nice sunny position, and when I water these, I water right down to the roots. I know people who watch this channel will think, well, you're repeating yourself, you always mention that. It's just that I do get people that look at my rhubarb and say to me, why isn't my rhubarb like your rhubarb? But when you talk to them and get down to the bottom of it, it literally is because they don't give the rhubarb enough water. So that's the secret to good rhubarb. Put it in a nice sunny position and give it plenty of water. Now July really in the UK is the last month that you should be looking to harvest your rhubarb. After that point the stems will start to go a little bit softer and a little bit bitter. So these rhubarb you're looking at now on the camera are going to be harvested within the next 2 weeks. And what you'll see on the next tour, when this is all gone, all the leaves and the stems will be gone and the ground will appear to be empty. And what I'll do is mulch over it, probably put some multi-purpose compost and keep that on top over the winter so the rain and the frost can take the nutrients down to the rhubarb crowns. Just beyond the rhubarb I've got a couple of blueberry bushes here. I have got some blueberries on there, very tiny. I should have netted these over really. But this is the first year I've planted them in this position, so I've located them here really this year as an experiment and almost accepted them as a sacrifice this year just to see how they grow. But I think they've established pretty well. And what I'm going to do next year is make sure they are netted over and then try my best to increase the amount of blueberries that I get. Then I've got my raspberries just at the end of it. They're starting to go a little bit yellow now, and that's natural because I've harvested so many raspberries. But the thing about these raspberries, I think they're a mixed variety, but I will get another harvest of raspberries from early September onwards. And then between the rhubarb and the raspberries and the Polyhouse are all my potatoes. There's two varieties of main crop potatoes here. We've got Maris Piper and Desiree. They won't be ready for harvesting for another 3 to 4 weeks, but they are already showing signs that they're going near to harvest because some of the leaves are going yellow, as you can see. But again, I will give them a good watering today, although I would find that as a crop, potatoes are not heavily water dependent. And what I'm going to harvest today is my first earlies and my no-dig experiment. These potatoes here you can see under the grass mulch all the way along down to the fence. I'm going to take up and harvest. I'm going to film that to see how many potatoes I get off there. These are first earlies and they're a variety called Swift. So I'm really interested to see how many potatoes I get from that. And if you want to find out, then just check out the videos that I'll put on once I've harvested them. So as you can see, loads going on outside, but let's have a quick tour inside the Polyhouse and see what's going on at this time of year. Straight away, as I even approach the Polyhouse, the temperature is just phenomenal. I'm not too sure what temperature it is in here, but it's very hot. A few more lettuce here that are going to seed, and again I'll harvest some of them today. These are the all year round variety, and then beyond that my favourite variety, which are the Lakeland, which are these crunchy ones here, a little bit like icebergs. And then I've got some more Lola Rossa. And look at these spring onions. Oh my word, the size of the growth of those would suggest that they're not spring onions but large onions. And these are a combination of two varieties, Ramrod and Ishikura. And some of these will be harvested today. I just come back to this bed here with the lettuce. I have got a few beetroots I put in the other day. I had a few spare plants, so I've just planted them in where there was a gap. So they should give me a couple of beetroot for maybe through the winter. And if I come back over to this bed here, there's another sowing of spring onions here. You can see those here. They were put in just last week where I took out some lettuce. So as you can see, what we're trying to do with vegetable growing is give a continuous supply, something called succession planting. Just by regularly sowing and planting gives you that continuous supply rather than one glut and then you're finished. And if you see these spring onions here, they're looking great, so they can come out today as well. Now over here, these are the tomatoes that I was telling you about, and I'm really pleased with these. These were the ones in the main tour that were struggling in the grow bags, and they were virtually dead. They were yellow and really lifeless. So I took them out the grow bags, put them into the ground. I've gave them 2 doses of diluted hydrogen peroxide, which puts extra oxygen into the soil, which is really good for the roots. And as you can see, they're now looking really healthy. There's certain things as vegetable growers that you feel really happy with, and to almost rescue these plants, which I could have easily put on the compost heap easily, but because I had the space in here, I'd just taken up some other lettuce that were here. I thought, you know what, give them a go. And I'd read about hydrogen peroxide and thought, well, let's give that a try to see if it works, and it really has. They are a little bit behind where I'd want them to be at this time of year, but in this environment they'll soon catch up and start producing tomatoes. Something else I'm really happy with is right next to the tomatoes, and these are onions. These are seed onions that I planted right at the beginning of January, and these are a variety called Exhibition. Now, because I've got so much space in this polyhouse, I thought, well, as an experiment, plant some of these onions inside rather than outside and see if they work. But as you can see, the size of these already compared to the ones that were planted outside, which were planted at a similar time, is incomparable. These are bulbing up really well, and they will get bigger as well. They are starting to fall over, which is an indication that they'll be ready for harvest soon. But I am going to leave them in a little while to see how well they do. But already the bulb size of the onions are already usable, but I think they're going to get bigger. So once I do harvest them, I will show you a video to show you how large they actually got. But the indication is that growing them inside produces better onions than those outside, and I may well next year grow more onions in here because I have got the space. Next to the onions is something I always love growing, one of my favourite vegetables, and that is celery. This is celery that was grown from seed. It's a variety called Octavius F1, and I grew it last year. I would say that last year it appeared to be slightly bigger at this stage, but I think give that another month or so and it will start to become usable. And it really is lovely celery. I used it in so many ways last year, casseroles, stews and other recipes, and it's fantastic flavour. So again, I'm very hopeful that's going to give me a really good crop of celery. And if I move just beyond that, for the first time I've grown celeriac, which is part of the celery family, and I've had mixed success with that. I think I'm probably going to get about half a dozen. And the reason I've only got a few plants is partly my fault, because when the plants were starting to grow and they germinated, we had a particularly hot period of weather, and because I was working, I didn't come to the polyhouse to water on a night time, and some of the plants got scorched. It was that hot in here. I would say it's lesson learned for next year to keep a closer eye on my plants. Well, that completes the tour at what is a fantastic time of year. As you can see, there's so many changes from the last vegetable tour, and there's so much going on. I've hopefully given you one or two ideas about how you can hopefully make your vegetable plot a little bit more productive by using succession planting, so that when you take a crop out, you replace it with another one. I'm lucky enough on my plot to have a huge amount of space, and as you see, there's gaps where I can plant where pretty much whatever I want. But you might have a much more restricted area, and therefore using your space with succession planting to make the plot as productive as possible is only going to be a benefit to you. Also, like I've identified in my tour, there's one or two crops that haven't worked as well as I thought. Are there any crops that have disappointed you this year? It'd be great if you could share in the comments below which crops have been successful for you and which ones you've been disappointed with. Now, I really love doing these plot tours and showing people what's going on in my vegetable plot, and I really hope you've enjoyed the video. And if you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to subscribe to the channel for future videos on how to sow and grow fruit and veg and flowers, and one or two recipe ideas, don't forget to press the subscribe button. And I'll see you all on the next video.